Hi, I'm Lindsay Kuipers. I'm here today with the authors of the book, 6 Practices That Boost Bilingualism and Biliteracy, the Addalingua Approach to Dual Language Immersion Education, who have collectively over 50 years of experience, although they don't look like it, with bilingual and biliteracy development. So this is Lilah, Ambrosi, and Stacey, Washburn. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So just a little bit of background about our authors and co-founders of Addalingua. Stacey received her master's in Romance linguistics and second language acquisition and holds a certificate in immersion and dual language education from the University of Minnesota. Prior to founding Addalingua, she taught Spanish in a variety of settings from elementary schools to universities. She also founded and directed one of the first private Spanish and Mandarin Chinese dual language immersion programs in the country. As co-founder of Addalingua alongside Lilah and their team, she has developed strategies and curricular resources to support high levels of bilingualism and biliteracy used by teachers across the U.S. Lilah earned her bachelor's in Spanish and bilingual education and her master's in educational leadership. Prior to founding Addalingua in 2009, she served as both a teacher and a principal in a dual language immersion program in Michigan. Alongside Stacey and their team, Lilah has supported thousands of dual language educators across the country. She is passionate about equipping teachers and leaders with practical tools and high-quality training to strengthen their work in dual language immersion education. So, ladies, why write a book? Why now?
I'll let you go first.
You want me to go first? Okay. Well, first of all, we've been talking about doing this for, I don't know, since we've known each other.
Years and years.
Yes, lots of years. And we've always done things as an organization that were oriented toward a whole school or whole program. And yet, over the years, we've met teachers who maybe their schools hadn't contracted with Addalingua, but they were so intrigued by some of the practices that we shared in conferences and things like that. And so finally, it just felt we have a plethora of tools now that for individual teachers instead of just whole schools. And so we thought, okay, this book will support individual teachers. It's not very expensive. They can buy it themselves. And in it, we just spoke directly to that individual teacher who really values bilingualism and maybe senses, some of the things I'm doing aren't getting my students to where I want them to be. What else is out there? And so really the now came because we just feel really passionate about, like you read in Lilah's bio, equipping just individual dual language immersion teachers who can oftentimes feel really alone.
To piggyback off of that a little bit, it also came out of a desire because, as Stacey said, we have worked with schools and then individual teachers, but we've never been able to work at the individual teacher level. But we know teachers are looking to collaborate and looking to help raise the level of their professionalism and their knowledge of dual language immersion. And they have colleagues that want to do the same. So we were thinking that this could also provide teachers with a tool to have in a book study, to use in their PLC, lots of different ways that teachers can reflect on their own pedagogy in the classroom and practice, but also bring it to their community of colleagues so that they all can continue to learn together.
That's wonderful. Did you learn anything new or have any aha moments while actually writing the book?
I did. Well, I had several. My first aha was, even though we have been writing about this and developing teacher trainings and presentations and doing this for quite a long time, it was a really interesting process to synthesize everything that we've done into 6 key practices that at the end of the day are kind of the tenets of our approach. And so my aha moment was, synthesizing and writing I know that it's difficult, but it really brought home that bit of insight that, it's easier to stand up in front of a lot of people and share strategies and kind of go through a workshop style training. But when you have to synthesize it and think about that reader just reading, okay, what am I going to do with this? I think that old adage of when you teach something, you learn something. I believe that as this different form of talking to individual teachers really helped me process and come up with new ways of saying things. And I'm sure the same for Lilah too. One other aha moment, as we were writing, I feel like those individual teachers we've met over the years, I really felt like we were writing to them. It's like, we finally have something for you, instead of saying, oh, have your administrator call us. And so I felt it brought me right back to my roots and those days of being in classrooms all the time with teachers, as we remembered stories and things that brought us to develop all these different practices. And so it was a challenging but very enlightening process that also allowed us, I think, I don't want to speak for Lilah, but for me, to reconnect with why we do what we do. And it's for teachers and ultimately for the students that they're responsible for.
Yeah, I felt as I read through it in my living room that it was just like sitting with you two in the living room having a conversation about what goes on in the classroom. And I think that just really hits home for a lot of teachers to feel like you get it and you have the key practices that they really need. So
My big aha was just simply sitting in a space of reflection about the sheer amount of resources and tools that we have and have developed over the course of 20 years. And really thinking about how to bring those to life for a teacher who may be doing this on her own or with her colleagues, but not at a full school level or at a school level. It's appropriate across the board. But this new audience of just the single teacher, like you're referring to, sitting in their living room, reading the book, looking for support, looking for research-based practices that will really push proficiency in their students. It was really neat to think about all of the very practical tools that we have developed that now we have accessible for teachers, because our heart has always been supporting the teachers doing the hard work of dual language immersion education. And we know that it can be pretty, I don't want to say easy to sell, but the idea of educating kids in two languages, and parents eat that up. They love it. They think it's the best thing. Of course, I want my kid to be bilingual, and let me show you what my kid can do. All of these things that parents do. But we understand that the practical application and the practical instruction that has to be very, very intentional and deliberate can be very challenging, and teachers often don't know how to do that. And so with the writing of the book, the big aha for me was just a place of gratitude and reflection about all of these resources that we know through tried and true classrooms and teachers that have used it, they will be impactful immediately for anyone who reads this book. And that's what's super exciting to us. We don't have to be in some big, giant, year-long partnership. You can just read the book and you will walk away with very, very practical strategies and tools immediately that you can use in your classroom.
We were those teachers ourselves, looking, and directors of programs looking for clarity. And I think that there is a lot of noise in the field. Try this, do this. And what we found is that all of the stuff isn't what makes the difference. Even some of the strategies that have been extrapolated based on research and different, I don't want to say agendas in a negative way, but very necessary based on the history of our education system. Some of the practices that teachers have interpreted based on that research aren't always going to get students to the goal of bilingualism and biliteracy. And I think, to be honest, that's where our programs are falling down. And we can talk about that more later.
Well, not our
yeah,
programs.
not our programs.
Well, no, but we'll address that. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, many dual language programs start with great intentions, but they struggle to maintain strong partner language outcomes over time. So, what is the common misconception, or I know there's probably many, but that they have about how to implement dual language immersion, and how does the book address that?
Well, I would say one of the first common misconceptions is around the lack of education around dual language immersion, and that when educators and leaders are looking to start a program, they think things like, okay, we'll just take our English curriculum and we'll translate it to Spanish or Mandarin, whatever it is. And we just do whatever we do in our English classes, we'll just do it in another language. And that's just not how it works. And that's what we felt ourselves personally when we were teachers and leaders of programs. But also it's how teachers 20 years later still continue to feel. That's we sell this grandiose idea and we know it can work. Research tells us this can absolutely work. This works around the world, but the actual implementation is where teachers get tripped up and leaders don't know how to support. And so what we've really identified in the book are some as I've said, some very practical strategies that even if your whole school isn't on board and even if your whole school isn't practicing the Addalingua approach, that you as a teacher recognizing that your kids can do more in the partner language and that you can reach higher levels of bilingualism and biliteracy with your students. There are ways that you can look at that in your own instructional practice and what's going on in your classroom to help kids continue to develop those higher levels of bilingualism and biliteracy.
I really, over the last 20 years. As Lilah said earlier, yes, parents want their students to be bilingual and biliterate. Many, not all. Some actually have a lot of fear around that. And what we found is that misconceptions, it's practices and beliefs about how we do school in one language, that those ideas are then translated into dual language immersion and they don't work. And so, for example, each chapter actually starts with a common misconception and then refutes it with, this is actually what the research says. And then here's what you can do in your classroom. And so I'll just give you an example. One common misconception is, well, I can just teach my content, teach my social studies and science and math, and students will just pick up on the language. And as long as I'm remaining in Spanish or Chinese or Arabic or whatever partner language, then my students are naturally going to start to acquire the language. And that's a hypothesis from Krashen from years and years ago. And while students can comprehend a lot, there's also research that says, but students have to actually use the language in order to move up the proficiency levels. That's the output hypothesis. So all of those types of, those are strongly held beliefs by some teacher. Like, I'm not a language teacher, I'm a content teacher. And we get it. If you're trained in elementary ed and you have a certificate in elementary education, like, you are trained to teach content. And so one of the practices to kind of help teachers rethink that idea is, how do we infuse language into content teaching in a way that isn't the old school, like, okay, we're going to do a grammar worksheet and conjugate all these verbs. And so that's just one misconception. But that's kind of how we start each chapter. Like, here's what you might think. And it's okay that you think that, because most of people do. And even if you don't and are questioning it, the people around you might believe that. Or, another common misconception is, okay, our students, they're in third grade, they didn't do well on an English standardized assessment. That means we have to add more English instruction. Again, it makes logical sense when we think about that from a monolingual perspective, but that is actually not what is going to help our students who are learning in two languages get to higher levels of proficiency in either language. So those are just a couple of the common misconceptions that the book outlines. But each of our practices and the tools we give address that and say, here's maybe a way to think differently, and here's some things you can do to support that new way of thinking.
Bilingual works with educator teams to help them prioritize the partner language by adopting these and other practices known as the Addalingua Approach. How has the approach evolved over the years as a result of working so closely with so many DLI educators?
So when we think about how we first started working with schools back in 2009, Stacey and I have learned a lot. Well, we can start there, because we really could see the benefits and how to help teachers help students realize those benefits. But we originally thought we had to do that with a lot of let's just say, control. We needed to control all of the variables. And as with anything in life, we have learned that a lot of things are very much out of our control, but we can still provide some really great resources and training for teachers to do what they do more efficiently, more effectively. And so I would say that our evolution has been ongoing. We are always continue to reflect and refine what we do, both on the training side of things as well as the resources that we have and that we provide for schools. Where we started with a lot of control and saying, teachers, you need to do X, Y, and Z all the time to be able to 1, 2, and 3. We've now really built our resources and our training to be very, very flexible, recognizing that every teacher comes to the table with different sets of expertise, different sets of training, and also oftentimes from many different countries. And so we are very firm in what we believe we want teachers to know about very good, solid practices in dual language immersion. And we not only provide the research to back it up, but then the practical tool tied to it. That's really where we differentiate ourselves, because we know that you can go take master's classes and you can sit in theory all day long, but then to bring that into the classroom is oftentimes where we fall down as educators. And likewise, we can be given a whole box of tools, but not really understand if that's research-based or is it tied to the correct research? Is it really going to yield the outcomes that they promise? And so that's where we've really chosen to spend a lot of time as an organization, is to understand the research, but also bring it to schools and teachers in a very practical way that then leads to tools being developed or resources being developed that they can use in their classroom all the time and immediately. So where we started with a lot of, I will say, hand-holding and control, we've relinquished a lot of that. But what we haven't relinquished is our desire to provide teachers with very practical strategies and tools all the time.
First practice in the book is put English in its place. Why is that idea so essential if we want students to develop high levels of bilingualism and biliteracy, yet often so difficult for schools to implement? Is it that they don't know how, or that they don't want to rock the boat?
I'll take this one. This is one of my favorites. I think for so long, our education system has been built on English monolingualism, right? And that has led to some really horrific, other languages were shunned essentially. And then because those other languages other than English were shunned, and so were the students. And, we've sat in rooms, and this is in the book too, with teachers who were themselves students years ago, came into the classroom unable to speak English, and hearing their stories and listening to what the education system, I'm just going to did to them, and how that impacted who they are. And yet they're there in the classroom again, trying to do it differently. Like, that makes me almost cry again. But I would say that English is every educator's knee-jerk response to make sure that their students know English, right? Because English is the language of power. It is the language of our assessments. And frankly, those assessments, the high stakes, standardized measures like SAT, ACT, that's what in many ways can determine, like, do I get money for college? And it's all, districts, schools. I mean, they look at, well, what are our English outcomes, right? That is what our standard measure is how students do in English. And I know we can't take a system and change it overnight. In fact, it's probably going to take years and years and years and years. And we've been putting up the fight for a long time. Because of all of that, English creeps in. And so the first thing we have to address is the belief system. And so I think your question about, is it difficult for schools? Yes, it's one of the most difficult things. And are they unsure how to keep English out and focus on the partner language? No one around them is saying it's possible. Okay, that's an extreme, but not many people are saying it's possible to put English over here and focus on the partner language. And so in that chapter, we give a very practical way for teachers to start doing that. Because when we look at the research, it is not English proficiency that is the issue. Students are intrinsically motivated to acquire English because it is that language of power and prestige. And now, granted, students do need support. We're not saying English isn't important. We're not saying that. But the way we get there, we have to focus on partner language development. So I think it's both. I think it's difficult because of the sociocultural context in which educators find themselves. I think because of that, it's like, well, how do I keep English out? It's impossible. Like, my students want to use English. Their identity is connected. Oh, if I'm an English speaker, because that's what our country has that's the message we've sent to these students, that if I am an English speaker, that means X, Y, and Z for me. That's a higher status. And so when we say to students, teachers, administrators, let's put English over here, there's like a visceral response, right? No, that means I'm not going to maybe be successful or be accepted into the school culture. And so it's really, really difficult. And so again, in that chapter, we go through, it's like English is this great big English in capital letters, and the partner language is this little bitty, because let's face it, it's the language that gets less attention always. And so it is transforming mindsets in school cultures to put the partner language on top. English will come, especially if we do a stellar job at making sure students are acquiring the academic language and literacy of the partner language. Then transfer and all these other things kick in. And so it's counterintuitive to students. It's counterintuitive to many teachers. And it's certainly counterintuitive to leaders. It goes back to my example of, okay, our students aren't doing well on this English assessment. Well, that's in the chapter. That's in another chapter of the book. Well, we get into all of that, so I don't want to do that now. But, those things have to be dissected through the lens of, we have to prioritize the partner language. Research says that's the language that suffers. That is the language that most bilingual, even emergent bilingual students who enter programs maybe more dominant in their home language, when they come into school, what language is slowly, even though we're trying to maintain their education in that language, it's still the language that tends to go by the wayside. And we want to change that. Those languages are so valuable, and we want to send the message that the people who speak them are valuable. And I think we failed to do that historically. And that's why we love dual language education, because it's creating a new paradigm in which other languages are just as important as English. And we hope that message not only increases bilingual proficiency and biliteracy, but changes people's minds and hearts.
I would also add that whenever we meet new teachers, one of the challenges that always resonates with them is that they struggle to keep their students in the partner language. Like what Stacey was saying, that English always creeps in. And it doesn't matter if it's a 90-10 two-way program, an early total, a 50-50. Everybody always talks about how they have to repeat over and over all day long in Espanol, por favor, or whatever the language might be. And you get tired of it. And yet it doesn't change the practice of what's happening in the classroom. And really that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding about how we should set up our classrooms to run, and bring the students along with the understanding of that journey too. The students need to understand the importance of putting English in its place. But really, when we talk about it that way, that's more geared towards the adult. But what we're helping the student understand is why it's so important that I stay in the partner language, and what this means for me, and why I need to practice speaking, and why we need to protect this space. Because we make these promises of bilingualism and biliteracy when we start these programs or sell these programs. But if we don't set up our classrooms in the right environment, and by that I mean putting English in its place and understanding when and how it comes in very, very systematically and very intentionally, then it completely undermines that primary goal of bilingualism and biliteracy. And when we don't develop that well, then the other goals suffer too. The academic achievement doesn't come along because the kids don't have the language to handle the content. And so it's very, very all-encompassing when we say put English in its place, but it's there for a reason. And as Stacey said, it's not to say that English isn't important. English is very important. No one is debating that at all. But what we're saying is that the partner language is very important too. And the development, the intentional development of that partner language is what leads to all of the gains and all of the promises that we make to families when we begin these programs and when they put their little kindergartner into the program. It's one thing when you're talking about a kindergartner, the stakes are really low. But when you start getting to middle school and when you start getting to high school and things start falling down because kids don't have the language to handle the content in the partner language, it's because we haven't understood how to put English in its place. And it has a time and place, but it can't creep in during partner language time. And this chapter very specifically outlines, first of all, why it's important to understand that and how to share that with your colleagues and leaders, because as Stacey said, leaders don't understand. It's not what we're trained to. It's not how we're trained in our monolingual education society. So it is important that you understand the why, but also then how do I create this classroom space that really protects and promotes and prioritizes the partner language so that we help kids reach those goals and we have a very high bar and we know kids can reach them. We see it happen all the time without English creeping in continually.
Well, and I think you landed on something there too, Lilah, is we hear this a lot. I don't know. It's called you know, in Spanish, it's the pobrecito syndrome. We have seen many times that when students graduate from these programs, and I've even talked to, again, bilingual teachers who spoke the partner language in the home, and they all will say, why didn't someone say, you're making lots of errors, or you kind of sound like you're speaking English, but you're using Spanish words, and they feel kind of like they weren't held to a high enough standard. And so I think we have to balance, because we have to remember that when we say this language, the partner language is important and that we all need to use it, then students do it. I mean, I will tell you, when we started the practice that is in chapter 1, you could walk into any classroom and people are going to say, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Well, Diane Teddick and Tara Fortune came and toured, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And because not one student, not one, spoke any English during Spanish instructional time. Not one. The teacher could leave the room. The students would remain in Spanish during small group time. But it took shifting the entire culture, and it took prioritizing the partner language and helping students understand how important it was. And again, that's all explained in chapter 1. So I don't want to give it away, but it works. And it works when we hold to those expectations. And it's not punitive, it's celebratory. And it's something students feel really proud of and good about. I mean, for the home language speakers of the partner language, they're like, oh, my language is being honored. It is the language that is important here. And for those English dominant students, they're like, oh, so English isn't the end all be all. And they can kind of, maybe I have something to learn from the home language speakers of this language. And it reshapes the classroom in a powerful way, not just so that students can reach higher levels of bilingualism, but also, again, the way they think and the way they interact with one another. It works. It just takes teachers believing that it will work. And that's what we talk about a lot in our trainings. And so, because it's hard. Like Lilah said, it's like, oh, I know they're going to do it anyway. So I have 5 billion other things to do. But I tell you what, in schools that have made it of primary importance, it's pretty phenomenal. And that incredibly impacts the proficiency levels of these students in the partner language.
And that's all just chapter 1. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, it is. But it's not a long chapter. We say it very succinctly.
Yeah. Well, I have a challenge for Lilah and Stacey in one sentence. You have to say this in one sentence.
Oh boy.
Ready? What makes the Addalingua approach different from other dual language approaches? One sentence.
What makes the Addalingua approach different is that we empower teachers to focus on partner language development. And that changes everything.
Well, that was good.
Yeah,
That's good.
well, I mean, we've been writing about this.
20 years of work, one
Mhm.
sentence.
Yeah,
Yes,
really.
it's
Geez,
true.
that's like a challenge. I would say what makes the adult, oh gosh, I hope this doesn't go longer than a sentence, but you know how we are. Okay, I'll try.
You can use a
Um,
semicolon.
yeah. Comma, comma, comma. It's just one run on sentence. I would say that what makes the Addalingua approach different is that it is founded in research and it is practically developed, and it is done so for the intention of empowering dual language immersion teachers. And that's very different from a big box curriculum or a master's class.
Great.
Okay, I gotta add one comma.
You can.
It's not only informed by, but it's informed by teachers themselves. You
Yes.
know, it is. It's like, oh, it is so teacher created. It started with us, but like I said, so many have contributed their thoughts to it along the way. Okay, I'll be done now.
And I mean, I would add the evidence of student proficiency too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
It's different.
Can I add one more thing too?
Mhm.
Sorry. Well, we can't just do one. I would say that that's what makes our approach very different is that when we founded Addalingua, one of the very fundamental beliefs that we had was that kids could do more, and they weren't living up to all of the expectations and all of the promises that we were making about bilingualism and biliteracy.
Well, the
And we
kids
knew-
weren't, the adults weren't holding. The kids weren't not living up to it. They just weren't asked to.
Right, because the system wasn't set
Right.
up to help to know how to get kids to realize those benefits. And so I think that what sets us apart is the bar that we set. I think we set a much higher bar, and we help teachers have the tools and strategies to help kids get there.
Period.
what is one moment you've seen in a classroom that made you think, this is what dual language immersion education should look like, or this is why I love my work?
Oh, that's a good one. I have so
Uh,
many.
I think there's a few different moments like that stick out to me, and I would encompass many of our interactions that we have with teachers when they have a light bulb go off and they are like, gosh, I knew it wasn't working, but I didn't understand why it wasn't working, or I didn't have the resource to help my kids do this particular thing. And now I understand why. And so it's that moment of like collegiality, but also light bulb moment for teachers that is so empowering for us as a team and as an organization. I would say as a teacher, I had many different moments like that. And watching my kids interact spontaneously, obviously in the partner language, always just like melts your heart. You're like, this is exactly why we're doing this. Or when you see them spontaneously helping one another or helping somebody in the community in the partner language is just so powerful, because it's a method that we can provide students in order to make connections with other people that they might not be able to make as a monolingual in the world. So that's what we love. We love that side of it. And in fact, we tell this story all the time, but when I taught kindergarten and was on a field trip, it actually didn't happen in the classroom. It was a field trip in that, the kids were just listening and they wanted to hear and they wanted to know. Like they heard somebody speaking in another language and they're like, I think they're talking about an apple. Who knows what they were talking about? But the fact that they actually turned towards, they wanted to know, and they weren't like turning away from them like, oh, they must be talking about us, or, the typical things that happen when we don't embrace other languages. And so it's so powerful how the gift of another language opens children's worlds up, but not just for the job market and not just for academic achievement. It opens up a side of them that they won't develop as just a monolingual. They are open to differences and different people in a way that you can't manufacture in a culture class. And so that's where our real deep love and desire to promote global empathy comes from, because we know kids are our future and we want them to be prepared and be ready to build bridges and not break them down. And language is one way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
When we see teachers that we've, that have been in our professional learning courses or that we've workshopped with for several years, and when I go in for observations and I see them using one of the tools that's in the book or using one of the strategies that encourages more student output. And it starts to become almost like a dance. And I think we say this in the book. It's this back and forth, and it's like, wow, that made a difference. And even if it's just for this one teacher and these students in this one classroom, and again, I'm not like, woohoo, we made the difference. I'm saying collectively, all of the work and the teachers we've worked with have done this. And I walk into a room and I don't hear students sneaking or trying to use English on the side. And it's like, okay, this is what we're all about. It is giving prestige and power back to the partner languages and the people who speak them. And so when I see the strategies and some of the tools, when they're implemented, and then we get to see that happening and we get to hear teachers will say, oh my goodness, my student, we were just reading a book and he's like, oh, look, there's a noun and there's an adjective and it's describing the noun. And look, see, they're agreeing, for example, in gender and number. And the teacher is so excited. And I'm like, yep, there's metalinguistic awareness right there. When teachers see the delight students have in unpacking language, whatever language it is, that's really powerful too. Because we know that metalinguistic awareness is so important for literacy and academic achievement and all of those things. Some of these stories are in our book, so you can read more about them.
Perfect. If a dual language teacher listening today could change one thing tomorrow to strengthen bilingualism in their classroom, what would you recommend? What is one actionable small step a reader could take today to start implementing the Addalingua approach?
I got it. You got to
I
buy the
have
book.
it.
You got to buy the book. I don't know. There's
Buy the
6
book.
practices in there. Like I would say start examining how your practice is contributing or very unintentionally not contributing to the goal of bilingualism and biliteracy on the partner language side.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar in that I think the first step is to really take an honest assessment and reflection on what is happening in the classroom. Really just sit and watch and listen about what language is being used, how the difference of percentage of English to the partner languages. And then ask yourself as a teacher, is that what I want? Should it be more in the partner language? Most often the answer is yes, you need more in the partner language. And if that answer is yes, and you're looking for strategies and practical tools, then as Stacey said, buy the book because they're in there. And we've spent 20 years with many educators developing these resources to bring to teachers for this exact purpose, because we know that when you do take an honest, reflective look at your practice, most teachers in dual language programs, because this is not how we educate our teachers to teach, need more resources, need more support, need more community.
Awesome. So the book is on Amazon. It's only like $39 and you get so much information. I sat and read it, like I said, in my living room and felt like I learned more with that than with my master's classes. So I am just excited that this book will be released to all the teachers around the world. Thank you for all your work with teachers in the last 20 years and for taking the time to synthesize everything that you've learned to make it practical for teachers. So is there anything else you guys want to add?
Just thank you, Lindsay, for having us on and letting us talk about what we love talking about. So yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.